this is Michaela from Team Retro, where we like retro games and we like the devices that bring them to us. Now here in this footage lies another Amazon Prime box carrying a device that I spent quite a bit of money on. And this device is the ayaneo Geek. Now I just did a video previously on the ayaneo Air where I installed Chimera OS on it, and that got me wanting a device with slightly better battery life that still ran Windows. So I decided to settle on this model here because it is the 800p screen, which is the same type of screen that you might see on the Steam Deck. And this is the cheaper model ayaneo Geek that you can actually get. And I decided to settle on this model because any YouTuber that got a review unit got the 1200p screen. And so there isn't a lot of representation as to what the cheapest model ayaneo Geek is actually like. And so now it's time for an in-depth review of a model that we really haven't seen featured on the internet. This is going to be a long one, so let's strap in and let's get to work. Alright, we're going to start with an unboxing here. So we're going to gently take this plastic off and we're going to open up this very sleek looking box. Believe it or not, this box is actually a very tight fit and it was very hard to actually open up the lid and get to the juicy product inside. Once we finally got the lid off, we got treated to this nifty little piece of plastic with a silhouette of the ayaneo Geek as well as the logo. I actually found this useful for things like putting the serial number sticker on and the protector in case I wanted to package this up to resell later. And here's the device itself. First impressions are that it really does look professionally built and put together. This is a pretty pricey device and it actually does look like a premium product just at first glance. That screen right off the bat just kind of screams to me that it's going to be a beautiful little 7-inch screen. Second impressions are it is pretty ergonomic just holding it in my hands. I'm not quite sure at this point what the experience is going to be for long-term play, but it does feel pretty comfortable. Putting the device aside for a second and finishing up the unboxing, you have a bunch of different accessories and adapters for different parts of the world. And one thing of note here is if you do decide to open up the device to swap out the hard drive, you do get a box of replacement patches to replace the ones that you are most likely going to break when you go to open up this device. These are one-use attachments, so it's nice to see that they actually planned for that and gave you some replacements. And here is the 65-watt power charger. And everything else is pretty standard fare for an ayaneo device. You get a couple of USB-C to USB-A adapters, you get a USB-C cable for charging, and then if you do plan on using this in other parts of the world, you get the proper adapter plugs for that as well. Alright, let's take a tour of the device and let's start at the front. You have two Hall sensor joysticks with LEDs surrounding them. You have your 4 face buttons, you have start and select on the left, and you have your 2 ayaneo buttons on the right. And everything does feel kind of properly placed and responsive and it is pretty easy to reach everything you need to reach. I'm actually kind of a fan of the start and select buttons being on the left like this. Oddly enough, I actually prefer that over the start and select button placement on the Steam Deck. On the back, you have your fan, and at the top you have another fan, as well as RC and LC buttons, and you have your shoulder buttons here as well. Now, I really do like the R1 and L1 buttons. They are nice and clicky and responsive. I have to say though, I'm really not a fan of the trigger buttons. They seem to have just a little bit too much travel. However, I'm the type of person who got an Xbox Elite controller just so I can tighten up the L2 and R2 buttons. I actually don't like them to have a lot of travel, so to me this is kind of annoying. Another plus that this has over the Steam Deck is the fingerprint sensor on top, making it easy to unlock your device but able to secure it at the same time. And you have 3 USB-C ports instead of 1, and they are all capable of video out, as well as a slot for micro SD expansion. And I do like the little door at the bottom, but I did notice that over time it did start to wear out pretty quick and not close all the way. Alright, time to hop on our Chocobo and ride on into Spec Town. So this particular device is sporting an AMD Ryzen 6800U with 8 cores and 16 threads, and we have an RDNA 2 GPU. Depending on what model you pick up, you'll either get 16 gigabytes or 32 gigabytes of LPDDR5 RAM, and you'll end up with a 512 gigabyte or a 2 terabyte hard drive, plus you'll always get that micro SD card slot. Now, one important thing to note here is these are M.2 2280 NVMe's, and they are user replaceable if you decide you want to get a bigger hard drive and install it yourself. You have a 7-inch diagonal IPS LCD touchscreen similar to what you'll find on the Steam Deck, and it is a 1280x800 16:10 aspect ratio. You also get Bluetooth 5.2, Wi-Fi 6, a 50.25 watt-hour battery, and 3 USB-C ports that are capable of video out. These devices also come pre-installed with Windows 11 Home. Now, I did do a teardown of this device, and I did replace the hard drive with a 2 terabyte, and I'm going to feature that process on a separate video, but I just wanted to show you how involved the teardown process is. They give you a metal pick and a piece of tape, and they want you to pry this piece off in the hopes that your device won't get scratched. In my case, I do have 2 small scratches on the side of my device from doing this teardown. And that's honestly a bit of a pain. I kind of wish that I had visible screws as opposed to hidden ones on a sleek device. But once you do get in there, you realize that the hard drive can very easily be replaced because these are standard NVMe hard drives, and you can get some pretty good ones on Amazon. And so whereas the Steam Deck can probably only go up to 1 terabyte of storage, you can go up to 2 terabytes of storage very easily here. While we're comparing to the Steam Deck, let's go ahead and compare the 2 screens. You'll notice there is slightly less bezel on the ayaneo Geek, and that the colors and the saturation does seem to be brighter at default settings. So here we are at 50% brightness on both devices, and you could see right now the ayaneo Geek just strikes me as a little bit brighter and a little bit more saturated. If you take a look on the wood border around the Super Mario World logo, on the Geek it just seems a little bit more yellow. However, I also need to take into account that I use a plugin on the Steam Deck called Vibrant Deck, and I actually increase the saturation to about 135, and once I do that, I notice that the differences between the two screens become almost indistinguishable. And so if you're going back and forth between these two devices, they have fairly identical screens. However, the ayaneo Geek screen is slightly brighter out of the box, whereas with tweaking, you can get a nicer color saturation out of the Steam Deck screen. Now let's do one more ayaneo Geek to Steam Deck comparison, and we're going to break out Scaly here, and we're going to throw the ayaneo Geek on it, and you notice that it comes in at about 660 grams. Whereas with the Steam Deck, if you accessorize it like I did with a case, then you're actually coming in at 834 grams with the D-brand kill switch case attached. However, I would say as far as ergonomics and comfort level, both of these devices are equal despite their different weights. Going through initial setup, Windows 11 setup is about what you would expect. Select your language, select your time zone, connect to a Wi-Fi network, and sign in with an account. Now, I actually do not recommend that you use a Microsoft account on a handheld like this. I usually just create a local account, and that's actually simple enough to do. All you have to do is not connect to the internet, and you can continue with a limited setup. And if you click that continue with limited setup option, it will let you go ahead and create a local account. And you can name that account whatever you want. I'm just going to go with Retrogue here. And now this profile is not connected to an actual email. And then you'll also have your opportunity to set up the fingerprint sensor, which I do highly recommend that you do, as well as protect your device with a PIN or a password. And once you're in Windows, you can use the iSpace software to adjust the fan speed, adjust your TDP, and adjust your display resolution, and you can pretty much do all of this on the fly. Now, at time of recording, I would recommend that you not update this app just because I did have a couple of issues and I ended up having to uninstall and reinstall it. But other than that, despite its little bugs, it is a pretty good option for adjusting your settings depending on what game you are playing. Now let's get into my favorite part of these videos, and that would be the game testing. So we're going to start here with 5-watt TDP games. So I'm going to showcase a couple of games here that work really well at a 5-watt TDP, which means that you will get better battery life and a longer play session when you go to play these games. Now let's move on to games that play well at an 8-watt TDP, and in some cases I did end up turning the frame rate down to 40 frames per second just to get a little bit more out of the device. But starting with Mega Man 11 here, this was a game that I had a really hard time playing on the Win 600. But here on this device, it runs buttery smooth and works very well. One of the things I really like about this game is it does have a newcomer difficulty, so if you're not a fan of punishing platforming, Capcom did decide to put in a forgiving option for you. Lately, one of my favorite things to do on a handheld is play Final Fantasy XIV, and part of what's really gotten me into this game is the fact that there are now options to play this in a handheld mode, whereas I would have been confined to a monitor or a PlayStation. And I really enjoy the fact that I can grind out this game on the couch and level and run dungeons. And it's really nice to be in the 21st century and be able to play MMOs like this on a handheld device. So if it can play Final Fantasy XIV, it automatically gets points in my book. And at an 8-watt TDP at 40 frames per second using the AMD Adrenalin software, I have a good gameplay experience, and I can get up to 3 hours of game time before having to reach for that charger. For Monster Hunter Rise, I had to kick things up to an 11-watt TDP, running at average settings and capping at 40 frames per second. And again, I got a very positive gameplay experience. For this test, I went in and hunted a Master Rank Royal Ludroth because I'm just at the beginning of Sunbreak. And it took me about 20 minutes to take this monster down because I haven't upgraded my equipment yet. But when I did take the monster down, I checked my battery life from the beginning of the hunt to the end of the hunt, and I had lost about 10% of battery life at an 11-watt TDP, where the system typically would draw about 10 watts during the hunt. And so if I were to do a little bit of math here, I would estimate that you would probably average about 2, maybe 2.5 hours of game time with these settings before needing to reach for a charger. And I know we complain a lot about battery life in this community, but just keep in mind when the Nintendo Switch first came out, we only got about 3 hours of battery life, and we were perfectly fine with it. But now we get to play PC games. Alright, let's move on to emulation. Let's start here with GameCube. And we're getting good luck with Paper Mario Thousand Year Door with a Vulcan back end on the Dolphin standalone emulator. We're running at an 11-watt TDP, and we're getting 720p performance out of Nintendo GameCube. And I always test Paper Mario Thousand Year Door because this game tends to have graphical issues sometimes when emulating, but no such issues here. We're running perfectly. Here's the obligatory God of War test. We're running God of War 2 at an 11-watt TDP at 720p resolution. And I have to say, this is the first device that I've actually pondered playing God of War 2 all the way through, because I have to say, it really does look nice. And this was a game I was going to originally replay on the PlayStation Vita, but this 7-inch screen seems much nicer on my old man eyes. Now, just to showcase the power of this device, as well as using the Windows version of standalone emulators, we're running Pokemon Violet here at 30 frames per second at a 22 watt TDP, and this is the first time emulating this game that I've actually been able to get decent performance. Now, granted, there are a couple of graphical flickering issues, but those are few and far between compared to other devices I've tried to emulate this game on. Now, unfortunately, because this is pulling 21 to 22 watts, your battery life is going to absolutely tank playing this game. So I would only play a game like this if you are near a power plug or you are connected to an external monitor. But I'm finally happy to report that I have a handheld device other than the Nintendo Switch in where I can say this game is playable. Now, if Windows isn't your thing and you're willing to make a couple of compromises, you can opt to install Chimera OS and have a SteamOS like interface on this device. I'm running this off of an SD card at the moment because I didn't want to overwrite my Windows install. So as a result, I had some network issues and I couldn't really do any game testing on it. But one thing I was able to do was test to make sure the native TDP was actually working, and the developers seem to be bringing other features to this operating system, such as being able to control the joystick LED. I just did a video on how to install Chimera OS on an ayaneo device, so I'll leave a link to that video in the description in case you are interested in trying it out. However, I also had great success with another Linux-based operating system called Jealous. And this operating system is great because it is meant to run off of an SD card. And if you kind of just want to get out of the way of Windows and you want to just play some old retro games, you can actually dual boot into Jealous and you can just pick your game and go to town. And one thing I just happened to particularly notice while I was playing around with Jealous is there are some great options for Wii emulation that you can just access right from the menu, like what you want your controller to simulate. Some games have to have a sideways Wii remote, some games have to have a Wiimote with nunchuck, and you can also set the internal resolution here and you could tweak a couple other settings, and you end up having a very decent Wii experience. And it's a lot easier to configure here in Jealous than on the Windows side. So if you wanted to focus on Wii emulation, this may be an option for you. And I do plan on showcasing some of the finer points of using Jealous versus staying on Windows for these ayaneo devices, so look forward to that content in the future. Alright, we've covered a lot here, so let's wrap things up with what works well and what needs work. So let's start with what works well, and this device has a good screen and resolution rivaling that of the Steam Deck, especially if you opt for the 800p model. And honestly, in my opinion, I don't see a reason to go to a 1200p screen unless it's something that you really want, because with higher resolution comes higher power draw, and I think that 800p is kind of a sweet spot for handheld gaming. And this is a powerful little device. That AMD Ryzen chip is really working hard, and you can get performance out of this that you couldn't normally get on the Steam Deck. In addition, Windows is not necessarily the best operating system for a handheld, but there is some flexibility that comes with it, including being able to run applications that you normally wouldn't be able to run on a Linux machine, and you don't have to worry about any compatibility layers because it is Windows, it will just work. This is a supremely built device, and you're going to find that the build quality does look pretty premium considering that you're paying quite a bit. And I also do like that the hard drive that they have chosen to use with this device is very easily user replaceable, and you don't need to get any smaller size hard drives. You can pretty much just get any NVMe that would fit in a laptop or a desktop. And I do like that you have the flexibility to swap out the OS if you don't like Windows. You can go with Chimera, you can go with Holo ISO, or you can even go with Gelos if you want to focus on just retro gaming. Now let's talk about what needs work, and we're always going to say with a handheld like this that battery life is going to be an issue because it is. However, like I said earlier, we have been kind of accepting poor battery life on devices for quite a bit, and we've even been accepting poor battery life on laptops and other devices that run Windows. So the fact that you can get about 3 hours of battery life on this device if you're careful with your TDP settings is actually not terrible in the grand scheme of things. That said, due to optimizations in SteamOS, you are going to get more battery life out of a Steam Deck than you are out of a Windows handheld. Speaking of issues that come up with using Windows, there are sleep mode issues with this device. I would not recommend that you actually put this device into sleep mode before going from one destination to the next. I would say just shut it off because I did put it into sleep mode once and I found out that the fan was just going crazy when I took it out of the packaging, and the case and the device were both very hot. And there are other bugs that come with running Windows. For example, you're going to have to make sure that you do have a virus protection on it because it's Windows. And the ISpace software is very buggy. In fact, I can't update it right now because every time it updates, the update triggers my antivirus and deletes essential files, and then I have to uninstall and then reinstall iSpace. Also, when I got this device, the Windows key did not work, and I probably could have called customer service or Microsoft to get that fixed, but I didn't have time or energy to deal with either of those two options, so I ended up spending money on another Windows key, and ultimately I shouldn't have had to be put in that situation where I needed to do that. You could potentially damage your device trying to open it if you're not careful. And I do feel that if ayaneo can get their act together and release their Linux-based operating system, then you're going to have all the options of this device, but with none of the overhead and with none of the bugginess that comes from Windows. The problem is we just don't know when we're going to get that. And so now that the criticisms are out of the way, I will ultimately say that this device has become my new daily driver. I'm not saying I don't use the Steam Deck because sometimes I just want to pick up and play, but I'm actually using this device a lot more than I thought I would, and I am enjoying the experience along the way. So did I spend more money on this than I should have? Absolutely, especially because I purchased it from Amazon. But am I getting the most out of it like I would for any other handheld PC or laptop? Absolutely. And I feel like things are going to just get better from there as ayaneo puts out operating systems and optimizations and hopefully fixes their buggy software. But even if they don't, there are already efforts in the community to bring better TDP and other controls to this device. In fact, in my research, I've noticed that some people have already ditched ISpace entirely. And the fact that it has a lighter, slimmer form factor from the Steam Deck also makes it a serious contender as far as portability is concerned. And so let me know what you think in the comments below. Is this a device you're considering? Do you have one and love it? Do you have one and hate it? Or are you looking more at something like the ROG Ally? And you can always continue the conversation in the ayaneo section of the Retro Handhelds Discord, or you can head on over to the Steam Machine Discord at the Team Retro chat section. I'm hanging out in both of those areas in between videos. But that'll do it for this video. Thank you so much for watching, and if this video was helpful to you in any way, please be sure to like and subscribe. Until next time, bye for now, and don't stop believing.